Trigger warning, this episode includes discussions of brutal murders, child murder, and rape. Listener discretion is advised.
Bygone Echoes.
Hey there, and welcome to Bygone Echoes, a history podcast. I'm your host, Courtney, and today we are traveling back to 1884 to a time of gaslights and mysteries right in the heart of Austin, Texas. In this growing city, a series of gruesome murders unfolded, each one more harrowing than the last. They called him the Servant Girl Annihilator, an ominous title for a shadowy figure whose identity remains shrouded in mystery to this day. But these were not just crimes, they were a silent symphony of horror that played out on the dusty streets of Austin. Women were brutally attacked, their lives cut short in the still of the night, and this city, once a beacon of the Old West, transformed into a canvas of fear and suspicion. Unfortunately, many of the records from this period are conflicting, ill-documented, or just purely fabricated. So, as we delve into this chapter of history, we'll tread down the line between fact and folklore, between the known and the unknown. So join us as we unravel the tale of the Servant Girl Annihilator in an episode that explores not just the crimes, but the society, the panic, and the legacy of one of America's earliest serial killers. Picture the world in 1884. The Industrial Revolution is in full swing, churning the gears of progress and change. The air is filled with the soot and the promise of steam engines. Across the ocean, the Statue of Liberty, a beacon of hope and freedom, is still just a dream away from New York Harbor. Mark Twain has published his literary classic, Adventures of a Huckleberry Finn, and in the world of science, Louis Pasteur developed the rabies vaccine. It is a world that is teetering on the edge of modernity, where gaslight battles echo the encroaching tide of electric light. In the broader U.S., the air is thick with change, a nation rebuilding its identity after the Civil War. The wounds of the conflict are still fresh, and the nation is grappling with the aftermath. From the Reconstruction in the South to the growing pains of the industrial North, it was a time of inventors and innovations, robber barons, and the rise of labor movements. Women's suffrage, a whisper in earlier decades, is now a growing chorus, demanding a voice in the destiny of a nation that is reborn. The landscape of Texas was as varied and wild as the state itself. Think of a scene where the untamed spirit of the frontier, cattle rustling, notorious outlaws, simmering racial tensions, and stretched-thin law enforcement are all mixed together. The crime rates swung like saloon doors across Texas, often fueled by heated land disputes, resource battles, and personal grudges. Cattle theft and property crimes were rampant in certain areas, and with the legal system that's still figuring out its footing, folks sometimes just took the law into their own hands. Hello, vigilantism. If you're looking for neat crime statistics from this era, you will be disappointed. Back then, keeping detailed records wasn't exactly a top priority, so a lot of the data is just like dust in the wind. It's hard to catch and piece together. Now let's look at Austin, Texas. It is a city on the cusp of transformation, a microcosm of the American spirit of the time. It's not yet the vibrant capital that we know today, because Austin in 1884 is really still just a frontier town, and it's evolving, though quickly, into a metropolis. Its streets are a labyrinth of contradictions. You have dusty roads that lead to opulent mansions, saloons and brothels sitting alongside stately government buildings, and there were a lot of saloons and brothels. The Capitol building itself is still under construction, a symbol of the city's lofty aspirations. And Austin's a melting pot of people and cultures. Cowboys drive cattle through the streets while politicians debate in its halls. The city has a diverse population: Mexican Americans, newly freed African Americans, and European immigrants, each adding a distinct thread to the city's rich tapestry. Yet, beneath this bustle and diversity lies an undercurrent of tension. Racial, cultural, and economic divides that silently shape the lives of its inhabitants. Women at this time were expected to be the very image of modesty and restraint, spending their days spinning around the heart of their homes, cooking, cleaning, and caring for children. For married women, their identity was like a vine intertwined with their husbands, often without the right to own property by themselves. And fashion for these women wasn't just clothing, it was a statement. Corset cinching waist, long skirts brushing the floor, high-neck blouses, all stitching together the very ideals of Victorian modesty and femininity. Healthcare? That was a bumpy road, especially when it came to childbirth. Most women relied on home remedies, with professional medical care a very rare treasure. And the experience of being a woman back then was even more complex when you factor in race and class. Black women bore the dual burdens of gender and racial discrimination. Employment opportunities were mostly low-paying jobs like domestic work. Yet in the face of segregated and substandard education and healthcare, their resiliency shone brightly. These women were the pillars of their communities, actively participating in church life, the growing civil rights movement, and balancing their household responsibilities and work outside the home. This period, even before the stringent enforcement of Jim Crow laws, was already marked by profound racial divisions. Amid this complex backdrop, where Southern charm intertwines with the untamed spirit of the West, a dark chapter is emerging. The city, caught in the historical crosswinds, is about to be rocked by a series of mysterious and very violent crimes. These chilling events will not only rattle Austin to its core, but it will also mark a pivotal shift in the archives of criminal investigation. As we delve into the heart of this mystery, let's treat with respect and care, because these tales are not just of unsolved crimes, but of the lives that were cruelly and prematurely ended. December 30th, 1884 was a day like any other for Molly Smith. Molly was a 25-year-old mixed-race domestic servant living in Austin with her boyfriend at the time, which was a very bold choice for an unmarried woman. Molly was known, though, for her spirited nature and her defiance of societal norms. That night, while she and her boyfriend slept, an intruder wielding an axe launched a vicious assault, leaving both Molly and her boyfriend unconscious. Molly was dragged near her employer's house, where the violence continued, and she was raped and murdered. Her body was left in a haunting scene. They said she seemed to almost be floating in a pool of her own blood. Miraculously, her boyfriend survived the attack. This savage crime sent ripples of shock and disbelief through Austin. Violence was not unheard of, but the raw brutality of Molly's murder seriously stood out. As 1885 unfolded, there were no solid leads to Molly's case, and life went on as normal for most. But let's not gloss over a very grim reality of that era. The streets of Austin were far from safe, especially for female servants. Newspaper clippings from that era painted a disturbing picture of frequent harassment, break-ins, and even assaults and robberies against servants of all backgrounds. A 6-month cooling-off period followed, with the killer not striking again until May 1885. Eliza Shelley was a 30-year-old black cook to a prominent family in Austin. She raised her 3 young sons alone while her husband served time in a penitentiary. The family lived in a tiny cabin behind the employer's home. One night, while Eliza and her children slept in their shared bed, a man wearing a white face covering broke into their cabin. The killer murdered Eliza with a hatchet, inserted and removed a sharp object into her skull, and then wrapped her in a bedspread and placed her on the floor next to the bed where her children slept. Eliza's children slept peacefully as most of the horror occurred, although her oldest son, only around 8 years old at the time, was awakened by the commotion and recounted.
A man came in the room and asked me where my mother kept her money. I told him I didn't know. He told me to cover up my head. If I didn't, he would kill me.
In the aftermath, the local paper painted Eliza in a positive light, remarking on her good character, temperament, and steadfastness. She was thought of as a faithful wife, mother, and employee. And then just a few weeks later, the killer struck again. Irene Cross, a black woman in her late 30s working as a domestic servant, was a widow and a mother. One night, a knife-wielding attacker left her with horrific, fatal injuries. The assault was so severe that her arm was almost severed, and the witnesses shockingly described her as appearing to have been scalped. Demands for justice echoed through the city, and with each passing month, a palpable fear gripped Austin. The randomness and the gruesome nature of these attacks, combined with the inability of the law enforcement to catch the killer, caused widespread panic, and the newspapers made it worse. They sensationalized the attacks, amplifying public fear and significantly impacting daily life in Austin. Many servants began sharing lodgings, hoping that there was safety in numbers. Others slept in their employers' kitchens for safety, and some even thought that there was some type of evil or demon out in the community, and that was the culprit of these gruesome crimes. The black community was desperate to protect these vulnerable women, and some even turned to hoodoo, a slaver of folk magic. But sadly, in the face of such unrelenting horror, nothing offered much solace. In August, the killer struck again. A widowed domestic servant named Rebecca Ramey, a black woman in her late 40s, was viciously attacked with a club while she slept in her employer's kitchen. Instead of murdering Rebecca, the attacker turned his attention to her young daughter, Mary. Mary was only 11 years old at the time, and she was the youngest of Rebecca's children. She attended grammar school with dreams of becoming a teacher someday. Mary was attacked and dragged into the backyard, where she was stabbed through the ear with an iron rod and raped. She only survived a few hours after being found. The brutality inflicted on Mary, distinct from the earlier attacks, signaled a dreadful escalation. Now, even the children weren't safe. As leaves turned in autumn, Austin remained under a dark cloud of violence. In September, the city's nightmare continued. Gracie Vance, a 20-year-old domestic servant, and her boyfriend, George Washington, found themselves ensnared in this unsettling reality. With the shadow of danger looming ever closer, they, along with two fellow servants, clung to the belief that there was safety in numbers and shared their humble abode for the night. Orange tragically met his end under a cruel axe strike. The other two servants were attacked, but by some stroke of fortune, survived. Gracie, in a heart-wrenching echo of previous tragedies, was ripped from the sanctuary of her home, subjected to a brutal and merciless attack, and murdered, adding another sorrowful chapter to Austin's troubled tale. And then things were quiet for a while. On Christmas Eve, 1885, Susan Hancock was sleeping peacefully in her home while her husband slept in another bed in the house. Susan was known as a refined lady, a white woman in her 40s, a wife, a mother, and, important to note, not a domestic servant. On that day, she was dragged from her bed into the garden, where she was violently murdered. She was found with a sharp object protruding from her skull, which laid open in two pieces. Shockingly, only 1 hour after Susan was discovered, Eula Phillips was found dead in the wealthiest neighborhood in Austin. Like Susan, Eula was white, and she was a wife and a mother, and she was only 17 years old. She was struck with an axe while sleeping, carried to the backyard, raped, and murdered. These final two murders left the community and authorities even more baffled. And then, just as quickly as they began, the murders stopped. As we piece together the crimes, a haunting pattern under the cover of darkness emerges. The assailant, favoring an axe or other sharpened weapon as their ghastly instrument, struck with violent and disturbing intimacy. Victims were attacked while asleep, completely unaware of the looming horror. And post-attack, many of the bodies were disturbingly staged outdoors, signaling a brazen defiance of societal norms. The victims, diverse in backgrounds, were not exclusively women or servants, challenging the earlier assumption about the killer's target profile. However, a majority were women, predominantly servants, highlighting societal vulnerabilities and gender-targeted violence. Rumors suggested some early victims lived in non-traditional arrangements, possibly frowned upon by the community, adding another layer of complexity to the killer's motives. The nature of these attacks, personal, vicious, and executed with terrifying precision, underscores the killer's desire for invading the sanctity of homes, striking fear in the very place where victims should feel the safest. Now, let's turn the pages back to the investigation and the waves it created in the public sphere. In the 1880s, police work was in its infancy, especially in a burgeoning town like Austin. The police and detectives, armed with little more than basic investigative tools and intuition, faced a daunting task. Without the advantages of modern forensics, they relied on eyewitness accounts and rudimentary evidence gathering. Their methods, though earnest, were often hampered by the limitations of the time, leading to frustration and dead ends. As fear gripped Austin, the public reaction was a mix of panic and morbid fascination. Newspapers played a pivotal role in this, sensationalizing the murders, often at the expense of factual reporting. Headlines screamed of a midnight assassin and blood-curdling crimes, fueling the climate of fear and suspicion. The media coverage was relentless, and the community found itself in the grip of a true crime frenzy. This was more than just news, it was a story that played on the deepest fears of the public. Citizens began to take extra precautions, altering their routines, buying weapons, fortifying their homes against a threat that seemed omnipresent. As the investigation trudged on, several theories and suspects emerged. One theory suggested that it was a group of malevolent individuals working in concert to spread terror. Another pointed to a lone, deranged individual driven by unknown motives. Among the suspects, few names gained as much attention as Nathan Elgin, a local cook with a criminal record. After he died in an unrelated incident, a series of clues seemingly connected him to all the crimes, but conclusive evidence was never found. Other suspects included itinerant workers and unknown drifters, but again, nothing concrete ever materialized. Often, they blame the spouses or significant others for the crimes. The lack of a solid lead or arrest led to widespread criticism of the police. The community's trust in law enforcement wavered as the murders remained unsolved. This period, marked by fear and uncertainty, cast a long shadow over Austin, altering the city's social fabric. In the face of such darkness, the city of Austin stood at a crossroads, caught between the horror of the present and the hope for justice that seemed increasingly elusive. A string of chilling crimes that shook Austin in the 1880s didn't immediately transform the city, but they certainly set the wheels of change in motion. As Austin journeyed through the closing years of the 19th century, it was a tale of a city trying to find its footing, balancing the excitement of growth and modernization with the stark lessons from a deeply unsettling chapter in its history. Austin was slowly peeling off its Wild West persona to don a more structured urban cloak. But these events etched deep scars into the collective psyche of Austin, and Texas really as a whole, casting a long shadow of vulnerability and altering perceptions of safety. When similar crimes occurred, newspapers sensationalized the news again as the reappearance of the Austin murderer. But this period became a crucial turning point, pushing the city's law enforcement towards more advanced policing and investigative methods. In the wider realm of crime investigation and forensic science, the unsolved Austin murders hold a significant place. Occurring at a time when forensic methods were still in their infancy, these cases were a stark reminder of the need for more sophisticated investigative techniques. They predated the notorious Jack the Ripper cases, which would later bring global attention to forensic science, highlighting how much was yet to be learned and developed in this field. Surprisingly, or unsurprisingly, many linked Jack the Ripper to the Austin murders, speculating the acts were committed by the same person. The haunting legacy of these events continue to echo through literature and media, capturing our collective imagination with a blend of grim fascination and solemn respect. Unfortunately, every reference to these crimes has not been approached with the gravity that they deserve. The author, William S. Porter, later known as O. Henry, was a young man living in Austin while these crimes took place. He once casually dubbed the murders the work of the servant girl annihilators. And before I did my research, I found a certain allure in the term's dramatic flair. However, after delving deeper into the subject, I recognize its insensitivity, and I apologize for my earlier casualness. I have a much better understanding of the profound impact and the tragedy of these events, and they deserve to be spoken of with a reverence that honors the lives of those lost and those affected. Although there are no grand memorials to commemorate the victims, many of the victims you couldn't even find a photo of, their stories remain an integral part of Austin's complex historical narrative. These harrowing murders, predating the infamous Jack the Ripper, stand as a somber reminder to the relentless pursuit of justice and the human toll of crime during an era on the cusp of significant advances in forensic science. These murders, to this day, remain unsolved. And that wraps up today's episode of Bygone Echoes. We delve into the haunting narrative of Austin in turmoil, where fear reigned supreme and the pursuit of justice was hindered by the era's limitations. The unsolved Austin murders of the 1880s, with their chilling mysteries and tragic losses, reveal a dark past in what is now a bustling city. As we leave the gaslit streets of 19th century Austin, we carry with us the stories of those lost, and the enduring quest for answers that remains, even to this day, an unfinished chapter in the annals of American crime history. Next time on Bygone Echoes, we delve into the eerie world of Victorian-era asylums. These institutions, often misunderstood, were places where treatment and torment blurred. We'll explore their origins, societal attitudes toward mental health, and the portrayal in literature. Join us for a haunting journey through the history of asylums, revealing tales of compassion, cruelty, and the legacy that still shapes our understanding of mental health today.
Interested in learning more? We recommend The Midnight Assassin by Skip Hollandsworth, Austin, Murder and Mayhem by Richard Zalade, Haunted Austin, History and Hauntings in the Capital City by Janine Plumer, the website servantgirlmurders.com, the PBS History Detective Special on the Texas Servant Girl Murders, and visit our website at bygoneechoes.website for pictures and additional resources.